Today, I'm going to tell you the extraordinary story of a man who is now known as the father of climate science, a man I had never heard of until late last year, who's just remarkable. And it happened about 200 years ago. This is a family-friendly storytelling. And I'm hoping to turn this into a bigger show, an interactive show with a live audience. So this is my first time in telling this story, but I'm absolutely delighted to be here at the Just Festival and share the story of the genius janitor, a man who went from floor sweeper to climate pioneer. And this story begins 200 years ago. A story of a man who came up with a theory, came up with an idea that was a bit like a time machine. He went back in time, he saw what the world looked like 3 million years ago, but he also went into the future as well. And his idea is shaping the way we see the world today. And his name is James Croll. And as I said, I'd never heard of him until late last year, and not many people have. And his story begins in a very stormy, dark, stormy January night back in 1821 when he was born. And he was born in Perthshire, and his family were poor. They were crofters. And he was one of 4 brothers. And for 3 years, they farmed the land. But then the man who owned the land wanted to sell it. And the family were moved to a rough patch of land about 2 miles away that things didn't grow very well on it. And James Croll's father was forced to find work as a stonemason. So James had a very hard life. And his older brother died when James was 10. His younger brother died when he was very small. So it's not surprising that James Croll was very close to his brother David. There was only 2 years difference in age between James and his younger brother. But James says that he vividly remembered his brother's christening. And I don't know if anyone can remember what they did when they were 2, but James Croll can. And that gives you an idea of the mind and the memory of this extraordinary man. So he was brought up in poverty, really hard life. And he also had a disability. James Croll was born and the fontanelle on his head didn't develop properly, which meant that for the rest of his life, he suffered incredible pain in his head. And when he was a young boy, he had to wear a hat inside and out. And he was really reluctant to go to school because James believed that the kids at school were going to tease him because he had to wear a hat. So he didn't go to school. His older brother did. And his older brother would come back from school and tell him what he had learned. But when his older brother sadly died, James had to go to school, and he had to make the 2-mile journey there and back every day. And he absolutely hated school, hated it. And he really didn't like his teacher. His teacher was very, very strict, which they could be in those days. And James himself said he was just found it boring. He wasn't interested. He didn't like reading. He wasn't interested in maths, and there were no books in his house. So he was a really poor scholar, poor student in his own words. But all that was about to change, because when James was 11, his family went on a trip to Perth, about 8 miles from the family home, and they walked there and back. And when he was in Perth, James saw a bookshop, and he looked in and he saw a magazine, and it was called the Penny Magazine. And what drew James's attention was a picture of a bear on his hind legs walking across a tree trunk that had fallen across a river. And James was captivated with it. And it just so happened that he had a penny in his pocket. So he eagerly bought the Penny Magazine. And it was really closely printed, full of articles. And it was articles about Charing Cross in London. It was articles about Poland, about beer, about idea about Van Diemen's Land, which is now known as Tasmania. They had an article on William Harvey, who had just discovered about how the blood goes around the body. And there was an article about René Descartes, a philosopher. I think, therefore I am. And it opened James's mind. He began to read, and he learned all about art and geography and science and history. And the penny magazine was published every week for a penny, and James tried every week to buy a copy. And it was published by a very sort of impressive sounding society called the Society for the Diffusion of Useful Knowledge. So James was learning. And very soon he was saving his pocket money. He was wanting to buy books. He was always reading. But despite this, he still hated school. Still didn't like the teacher, who was really strict. And when he was 13, James actually left school. So he only had 3 years of schooling, but he was still learning. He was still reading. He was still reading the penny magazine and any book he could get his hands on. And he was supposed to be helping his mum with the farm and tend the animals and look after things, but he was just reading all the time. He was just getting distracted. And if he wasn't reading, James was thinking about what he read. So he was in daydream all the time. And his dearest wish was to go to university. He was fascinated by science and he wanted to learn further. But his family had no money. They were very, very poor and they couldn't afford to send James to university. There was absolutely no question of that. James had to get a job. So what did he decide to do? Well, he became a millwright. And a millwright is someone who mends farm machinery, really skilled. And James was a journeyman millwright, which meant that he traveled from farm to farm. Now, this was in the 1830s, 1840s. There were no cars, there were no vans. James couldn't afford a horse, so he had to walk. So he walked from farm to farm. And he got really sore feet. He developed horrible corns, calluses on his feet, so sore that he had to cut holes in his shoes. He was in a lot of pain. And also James's health had never been good. He always had pain in his head. So his health was pretty poor. And he would go from farm to farm and he would sleep in barns and in bothes, and they were very cold in the winter and often full of rats as well. But all the time, at night, if he could, he would read. He would still be learning. And for 6 years, he was a millwright and he hated it. It broke his mental and physical health. And finally, he decided to return home. So at 22, he came back to Perth and he wanted to continue learning. And the only way that adults could carry on their learning in those days was to go back to school. And that's what James did. He went back to school and he studied algebra with the boys at the school. And this seems very odd, but that was his only chance of learning. And then he had to find another career, another job. And he became a joiner. And he actually really liked being a joiner. He enjoyed it, it suited him more. He helped to build the local church. But when that had been built, there was no work left for James. So he had to go to Paisley to find work. And again, he had to walk. So again, that hard life walking, trying to find work, trying to earn money. And when he was in Paisley, he was being a joiner, he was happy, he was still reading, he was still learning. But then he started to get pains in his elbow, really sore pains in his elbow. And it became so bad that he couldn't actually lift things anymore. And it was because of an old childhood injury, and the bones just wouldn't move. The joint wouldn't move, and he was in a lot of pain. And he was told that he couldn't continue being a joiner. And James just had no idea what he was going to do next. There was no support for people in those days. There was no what we call welfare state to help people in need. James had to work. If he didn't work, he wouldn't eat, and his family wouldn't eat. So he thought what he would do is he would go to Perth and see what happened. So he walked to Perth, and it just so happened that he saw a flyer for a tea shop. And tea was really popular, still is, Everybody enjoys a nice cup of tea. And he went to the tea shop and he became friends with the tea owner. And the owner trained him in the art of selling tea. And James opened a tea shop in Elgin. But it wasn't a great career choice for someone like James Croll, because he was really shy. And he was a little bit awkward. He was quite socially awkward. He couldn't just chat to people. He wasn't somebody that could just go up to somebody he'd never met. So that's not good for a shop owner. Also, James was quite clumsy because of his very sore elbow. He also had really rough, callous hands because of the work that he'd done. He'd been a millwright and a joiner, so he had working man's hands. And there were no tea bags in those days. So what he had to do was weigh and measure the tea and put them into fine little sachets. So he was really clumsy and really ill-suited to be a shop owner. And also his head was very, very sore, and he often had to take time off as well. So the shop, sadly, after a few years, it failed. But there was one good thing that happened when James Croll was in Elgin. He met a young girl called Isabella, and they fell in love and they married, and they had a very happy marriage. And Isabella supported James in his reading and his ideas and his education all the way through his life. But what was he going to do next? He'd been a millwright, he'd been a joiner, he'd been a tea merchant. What could he do now? He decided he would open a hotel. He would make the furniture himself to save money, and he opened a hotel in Blairgowrie. And at the time that James was living, in Victorian times, there was a campaign against alcohol, the demon drink. It was thought of as not a good thing for people to be drinking, and there was a movement called the temperance movement. And James never drank, and he was part of that movement. And he decided he would open this hotel in Blairgowrie, and there'll be no alcohol served at all. Problem with that was that Blairgowrie had 15 pubs for 3,000 people, so it was quite popular. Drink was quite popular there. So the hotel, it didn't survive. James was certainly not a businessman, and he certainly wasn't a shopkeeper either. But what was he going to do next? Because again, he needed to earn money. And he decided that the next job, he would sell insurance. He would go around door to door selling insurance to people. And he hated it. And for somebody who was shy, for somebody who was socially awkward, to do a job like that was really, really difficult. To speak to people you've never met, to stand there and sell things. But because he was awkward and because he was shy, people actually trusted him. They thought, well, this man obviously knows what he's doing, and he's not doing the hard sell. So he actually became really, really good at selling insurance. And he sold insurance in Edinburgh, and he worked in Glasgow, and he worked in Dundee, and he even went down as far as Leicester in England and was selling insurance down there because the firm were moving him around, and he was very, very good at his job. But James absolutely hated it. For 4.5 years, he was selling insurance. He described it as the worst time of his life. His wife became unwell, so he moved back to Scotland, and he decided he'd had enough. He didn't want to do that job. And this is when he got his lucky break. He was 38 years old. He was ill. He struggled with his health, but he saw a job being advertised, and that job was for a janitor at Anderson College. And Anderson College is now part of Strathclyde University in Glasgow. And why would a janitor be his dream job? Because he would have access to books. There would be books everywhere. And the job was quite easygoing, really. He didn't have to do very much. He had to open the college. He had to wipe the blackboards, sweep the floors, close the college after the students had had their lectures. So he had hours where he could actually read and read. And he got his brother David, his younger brother, to do most of the actual cleaning work. So James spent hours reading. It was a brilliant job for this man. And he put his original mind to the big questions of the day. And one of the biggest questions of the day was about the Ice Age. How did it start? How did it happen? So James was sweeping the floor and he looked up and he thought. And he saw in the sky, of course, you've got the sun, a star, hydrogen, helium, and the sun gives the earth heat and light, helps us to survive. And James knew that the earth goes around the sun. And he thought, well, the earth's relationship with the sun has got to affect the climate on the earth. And what do we mean by climate? Well, it's a bit different from weather. You look out the window and you think, what is the weather like today? And at the moment, it's getting grayer and grayer. And what was the weather like yesterday? Oh, it was a bit sunny and then a bit rainy. But when we talk about climate, we're talking over a longer period of time. So we'll think about the climate in Scotland, and it's not really that cold, it's not really that hot, and it rains quite a lot. So the sun has a lot to do with the climate. Now, James knew that the earth, of course, goes around the sun, and it takes 365 days to go around the sun. And that is a year. But of course, there are other planets as well. And he looked at the solar system. He looked at Mercury, the closest planet to the sun, and then Venus, and then third rock from the sun, Earth, along with the moon. And then you've got the red planet, Mars. And then the gas giants, you've got Jupiter. And my particular favorite, Saturn with the rings. You've got Uranus that actually spins around the sun on its side. And then the one furthest away is Neptune. And James studied all these planets. He looked at the stars, and he didn't have a computer. He didn't have the internet. All he had was books and his mind. And he studied the planets, and he realized they were going around the sun, but that the earth wasn't going around the sun in a perfect circle. It was being pulled closer and further from the sun by Venus and by Jupiter. And so it wasn't a perfect circle, it was more like an oval. And this is known as eccentricity, which is a bit odd, but that's what eccentricity is. So this oval that the earth makes around the sun, and James worked out that there was a pattern to this, and that every 100,000 years, the earth is further away from the sun. And when it's further away, it's colder on earth. And now I want you to look at your feet. And is the floor moving? Or if you look outside, is the earth moving? Well, it doesn't look like it, but actually the earth is spinning. And that gives us day and night, as it spins around, one side facing the sun, other side away from the sun. And it's spinning on its axis, which is like a line from the north to the south. But it's not a straight line. If you can see on this globe, it's not a straight line, it's at a tilt. And that tilt gives us the seasons. It gives us summer. It gives us autumn. It gives us winter, and it gives us spring as the earth tilts away and towards the sun. And James worked out that that tilt, the angle of it, the position of it changes every so many thousands of years, closer and further from the sun. And the further away it is, the colder the earth is. And I don't know if you've ever tried spinning when the earth is spinning, or you've got a spinning top. Have you ever seen a spinning top? But they tend to wobble. And you tend to wobble if you've been spinning a lot. And the earth wobbles. We might not notice it, but it does. And when the earth wobbles, well, that wobble, James realized, changes over time as well. And this all affects how cold and how warm the earth is. So James wrote all this on Anderson College paper. He wrote it all up and it was published in a magazine. And when the scientists of the day saw this talk about tilts and wobbles and eccentricity, they were like, who is this James Croll? Who's this man that's writing all this? He's a genius. And when James Geeky, who's the head of the Geological Survey, and the geology is about how the earth is made. So he's a really important man. When he found out that James Croll was a janitor, he offered him a job. He wanted him to work for the survey so that he could write all his ideas down and form a book. Now, James was a little bit reluctant because he was always ill. His head was very sore. He couldn't do very much. He didn't want to do anything outside because that could damage his health. James Geeky offered him a job in the office and James Croll accepted. But before he could take that job, he had to pass an exam. And James Croll had been at school for 3 years. He had never taken an exam in his life. These were the civil service exams, English and maths. And James Croll failed these exams, despite working out the eccentricities, the tilts, the wobbles of the earth. He failed. But the head of the Geological Survey knew that this man was a genius, knew what he was capable of, ignored the exam failure, and gave James Croll a job. So James worked at the survey and he would come home. He lived at Morningside, Jordan Bank in Morningside. And the survey was at Victoria Street, India Buildings in Edinburgh. And he would come home, he would have his dinner, have a little bit of a rest, and then he'd go on a walk. He loved walking if the weather was good, which it often isn't in Scotland. So if it wasn't good, he would stay at home. But if it was good, he would walk out in the hills. And he would always have a piece of paper and a pencil because ideas would come to him when he walked and he would write his ideas down. And it took James a long time to write his book because of his disability. He couldn't work for very many hours at a time, but he would write all the ideas that came to him. And when his head was so sore, he actually would get people to write the ideas for him. He'd speak about them, he'd dictate to them and they'd write down what he was saying. And James would often see doctors to try and treat his sore head. And one doctor actually gave him what was called aconite. And aconite was really popular in Victorian times, but it's made of a plant called monkshood, which is a hooded purple plant, and it's known as wolfsbane. And the reason it's known as wolfsbane is that shepherds would put the plant in meat and feed it to wolves and would kill them because it's really poisonous, it's really toxic. And aconite was made of this wolfsbane, and it was given to James as a balm, as a treatment ointment that he would put on his head. So he started to do that, but it was so poisonous that he lost his ability to speak. So he had to stop taking that. He'd rather have a sore head than not be able to speak. And he was being poisoned, so he stopped it. It took him a few years to recover from that. But eventually, after 10 years, he wrote his book. And his book is called Climate and Time. And it caused a sensation when it was written. And Charles Darwin, who wrote about the origin of the species, talked about evolution, he wrote to James Croll and thanked him and said, now I know what 1,000,000 years looks like. Because James Croll, it was like a time machine. because he went back millions of years, because he realized there wasn't just one ice age, there was many ice ages. And he went into the future as well, because he worked out that there was a natural cycle of climate on the Earth. And he also came up with a really cool idea. And this idea is called positive feedback. If you get money for your birthday and you put it in a savings account and you leave it for like a year, you get more money. Or if you're good at spinning and somebody says you're really good at spinning, you want to be even better, and you get better. So that's the positive feedback. And James's positive feedback, well, he looked at the world and he thought, what would the world look like in an ice age? It would be snowy. It would be covered in snow and ice. So it would be white and icy. The sun's rays come down and the white and icy and bright colors reflect those rays. It's like if you wear white on a hot day, it keeps you cool because the white reflects the sun. And that was what was happening in the Ice Age. The sun's rays would come down, but they would bounce back because of the whiteness and the shininess of the ice. It's a bit like if you've got a bicycle, and on the back of your bicycle, you have a shiny bit of metal. And if you do ride your bicycle in the dark, car lights shine on it and they bounce back. No, it's a reflector. You have, you might have it on bags as well, and on coats, you have shiny bits of metal that are bright when lights shine on them. So it reflected the sun's rays. And because it reflected the sun rays, the heat went back. So the earth got colder. And when the earth got colder, more ice and more snow formed. And that increased the ice age. This was known as the albedo effect. And albedo is albus, Latin for white. There's a famous wizard called Albus Dumbledore. You've got albino as well. And this was known as the albedo effect. And it was a really cool idea. So James, he was lauded everywhere. Everybody wanted him to speak, and they thought this man's a genius, but he was reluctant to travel. He didn't attend public meetings. He didn't go to clubs. He was very reluctant to speak because James was from a completely different background from all these scientists. The scientists of the day were men from money, men who didn't need to work, men who had an education. James had had 3 years of schooling and was always worried about money. It's so worried, in fact, that he was very reluctant to take an honorary degree from St Andrews University because he'd have to pay for it, and he wasn't sure he could afford it. Whereas these scientists who thought he was brilliant, they were from very comfortable, very wealthy backgrounds, university backgrounds. So James didn't go speaking, but what he did do is he wrote lots of letters and corresponded, and he liked an argument, and he liked to debate things through his letter writing as well. But eventually his head became even sorer, and he felt that he could no longer continue working. So he took what's called early retirement, but he lost an awful lot of money. He was plunged yet again into poverty. And his friends were trying to help him get a full pension, but it didn't happen. Universities awarded him money because he was so clever and because he'd come up with these great theories, but he was still struggling with money right to the end of his life. And he was still struggling with his health. He moved around the country trying to find places that might be better for his physical health. And eventually, in 1886, he settled in Perthshire, the place where he was born. He continued writing, he continued to read, he continued to letter write and debate with things, but his health slowly deteriorated and he died in 1890. And when he died, his widow was awarded £100 by scientific institutions because they held James in such high regard. So why haven't we heard of him? Why don't people talk about him? Well, he didn't get everything right. But that's no surprise. Not many scientists do. But also, his theories were so complicated that it wasn't until the 1970s that we had the technology to work out his theories. And James Croll actually worked out the thickness of the ice sheets in Antarctica before anyone had ever set foot on that continent. How amazing is that? So he didn't get everything right. He fell out of the attention of people, but now people are talking about James Croll because he came up with a natural cycle of the Earth's climate. Remember those tilts, those wobbles, those eccentricities, and how it would get colder and then warmer? And the scientists today, seeing how the Earth is warming up, realize that that's not part of the natural cycle that James Croll came up with. That what's happening now is caused by human beings. It's caused by industrialization. It's man-made. And also, James's really cool idea of positive feedback is being used by scientists to explain what is happening today. Because today, the ice sheets are melting. They're melting in the Arctic at the top, where the polar bears are, and they're melting in the Antarctic in the south, where the penguins are. Because the ice sheets are melting, when they melt, they reveal the sea, and particularly at the north, they reveal land, and they're darker. And when the sun shines, the darker colors absorb the heat. It's a bit like if you wear black on a hot day, you feel quite hot because dark colors absorb the sun's rays. The light colors bounce them back, reflect them, the dark ones absorb. So because there's land and ocean exposed, they're absorbing the heat from the sun. And because they're absorbing the heat from the sun, it's getting even warmer. And when it gets warmer, more ice sheets begin to melt. And that's known as positive feedback. And that goes right back to James Croll. Positive feedback doesn't have to be good, it just has to produce more of it. And scientists are using that to explain what's happening to the ice sheets today. So this janitor sweeping the floors, looking up at the sky and working out about the sun and the earth, he really is the father of climate science. He is the one that people are talking about today when they're looking at what's happening with the world and what's happening in the future. And there's something you can try at home as well, connected with James and his great theory. And all you need is an ice cube tray and some food dye. And you fill half the ice cube tray with water and then fill the other side with water that has black food dye in it. Freeze it. And on the next hot day that we have, put the clear ice cubes in one bowl, the dark ice cubes in the other, pop the bowls outside and see which one melts first. And with the albedo effect, it should be the darker colors that will melt first. But you can try that out for yourself and you can experiment out for yourself. But that's James Croll, a remarkable man, born into poverty, had a disability, limited education, taught himself, and came up with an incredible theory that is now helping us to explain what's happening in the world today. Thank you for listening to his story. If you have any questions you'd like to ask me about James Croll, about anything I've said, then please feel free to do so. Thank you.